Ladies and gentlemen, today we are diving into a powerful and life-transforming principle, how to completely surrender to God and receive what He has for you instead. This is not just a theological concept, but a profound journey that invites us to trust and yield ourselves fully to the will of God. We are not simply talking about believing in Him. We are talking about giving up our own desires, control, and plans to embrace His divine purpose for our lives. In this process, we discover that surrender is not a sign of weakness, but the ultimate strength. Surrender is often misunderstood. It's not about weakness or defeat. It is not giving up on life, but rather submitting to something greater than ourselves. True surrender is an act of strength, for it requires us to lay down our own will and place it in the hands of a divine purpose. The world teaches us to fight for our own way, to assert our own control. But true surrender is the realization that we are not in control. It's about acknowledging that there is a higher power at work, one that sees the bigger picture, one that knows the future before it even unfolds. When we truly surrender, we are not abandoning our dreams or desires. Instead, we are yielding them to the higher purpose of God. It is not the end of our aspirations, but the beginning of a greater alignment with God's plans for us. True surrender involves a shift in perspective. It means realizing that God's will is not just better than our will, it is the best possible path for our lives. It is not a rejection of our dreams, but an invitation to a more perfect, fulfilling reality. To surrender completely is to trust God with our deepest longings and desires. We let go of our personal agendas, our timelines, and our sense of control. And we trust that God will guide us. We trust that He knows us better than we know ourselves. He knows the plans He has for us, plans to prosper us, plans to bring us peace and fulfillment. The challenge comes when we try to hold on to our own understanding, when we want to dictate the outcome instead of allowing God to lead us step by step. Surrender is the decision to release our grip on the future, to stop manipulating and controlling the circumstances, and to let God take the reins. Surrender requires humility that creates humility to accept that God's wisdom is greater than ours and that His plans are higher than anything we could imagine. This kind of surrender doesn't come from a place of fear or defeat, but from a place of knowing that God is trustworthy, that His way is perfect, and that His love for us is unchanging. To surrender also means releasing our fears and anxieties. It's not just letting go of our plans. It's letting go of the fear that comes with uncertainty. We may not know what the future holds, but we know who holds the future. And in that knowledge, we can rest. True surrender doesn't always come with immediate answers, but it comes with peace. A peace it's the peace of knowing that we are in the hands of the Creator, who has the ability to lead us through every trial, every storm, and every uncertain moment. Surrender is not a one-time event, but a continual process. Each day we are called to surrender anew. Each day we are invited to trust God more, to let go of our own ways and to walk in obedience to His voice. The more we surrender, the more we open ourselves to the fullness of God's plan. Surrender is not passive, it is active. It is a conscious choice we make every day to align ourselves with God's purpose, to seek His guidance, and to follow His lead, even when the road ahead is unclear. When we understand the true meaning of surrender, we realize that it is not a loss, but a gain. It is the path to true freedom. Freedom from worry, freedom from the need for control, freedom from the fear of the unknown. It is the freedom to walk in the purpose that God has designed for us, knowing that He will provide, He will guide, and He will fulfill every promise He has made. Surrender is the key that unlocks the door to a life that is more than we could ever ask or imagine. Trusting in God's sovereignty is the foundation of a life fully surrendered. It is the recognition that God is in control of all things, that He is the ultimate authority over our lives, our circumstances, and our future. Trusting in His sovereignty means believing that no matter what we face, God is working all things together for our good. This is not always easy, especially when things seem out of control or when we don't understand the events unfolding around us. But it is precisely in these moments that our trust in God's sovereignty is most needed. To trust in God's sovereignty is to acknowledge that His wisdom surpasses ours, that He sees the bigger picture, even when we can only see a small part of the story. God is not limited by time or space. He is eternal, all-knowing, and all-powerful. He is not bound by the constraints of this world. When we place our trust in His sovereignty, we are surrendering our finite understanding and accepting that His plans are far greater than anything we could devise on our own. Trusting in His sovereignty requires faith that even when we don't understand the purpose behind our circumstances, God has a reason for everything that happens. One of the greatest challenges to trusting in God's sovereignty is our desire for control. We want to be the ones in charge, to know what will happen next, and to have a hand in shaping the outcome of our lives. But true trust in God's sovereignty involves releasing our need for control. It means allowing God to lead us, even when the path is uncertain. When we trust in His sovereignty, we are admitting that we cannot orchestrate the perfect plan for our lives. Only He can. Our limited vision can never compare to the infinite wisdom of the Creator. Trusting in God's sovereignty also means trusting His timing. We often find ourselves frustrated because things don't happen when we think they should. We question why certain things take longer or why we have to endure difficult seasons. But God's timing is perfect. His ways are not our ways, and His thoughts are not our thoughts. What may seem like a delay is often a divine setup for something greater. Trusting in His timing requires patience and faith, knowing that He is working behind the scenes even when we can't see it. Moreover, trusting in God's sovereignty means trusting that He is good even when life is hard. It's easy to trust in God when everything is going well, but true trust is tested when we face trials and hardships. It is in these times that we must remind ourselves that God is good and that His plans for us are filled with hope. He does not cause our pain, but He uses it to refine us, to draw us closer to Him, and to build our character. When we trust in His sovereignty, we trust that even our pain has a purpose in His greater plan. To trust in God's sovereignty also means recognizing that He is always with us. He will never leave us or forsake us. Even in the midst of our struggles, He is present. His sovereignty does not mean that we will never face difficulties, but it does mean that we are never alone in those difficulties. God is actively involved in our lives, guiding us, protecting us, and working all things together for our good. Trusting in His sovereignty is knowing that He is always at work, even in the darkest moments, and that His presence is a constant source of comfort and strength. When we truly trust in God's sovereignty, we are able to let go of worry, fear, and anxiety. We no longer need to carry the burden of trying to control every outcome. We can rest in the knowledge that God is in control and that His plans for us are good. Trusting in His sovereignty brings peace, because we know that He is working everything for our good, even when we can't see it. We can move forward in confidence, knowing that we are in the hands of a loving and all-powerful God who has a purpose for our lives that is greater than anything we could imagine. Letting go of your own will is one of the most profound acts of surrender you will ever experience. It is a decision to relinquish control, to release your desires, and to fully yield to the plan that God has for your life. We are constantly battling between what we want and what God desires for us. This struggle is natural because we live in a world that teaches us to chase after our own desires, to pursue our own dreams, and to achieve success by any means. But true fulfillment is not found in the pursuit of our own will. It is found in the submission to the will of God. When we let go of our own will, we are essentially letting go of our right to control the outcome of our lives. We must accept the reality that we are not the ultimate architects of our destiny. We may have dreams, goals, and plans, but the sovereignty of God means that He has a plan for us that is far greater than anything we could ever conceive on our own. Letting go of your own will doesn't mean abandoning your dreams. It means aligning your dreams with the purpose that God has for you. It's a recognition that His plan is the best plan, even if it doesn't look the way we expect it to. The challenge in letting go of our own will lies in our human nature. We are often driven by the desire to control, to manipulate circumstances, and to ensure that everything goes according to our own plan. But true surrender requires us to lay down our pride, to release the need to be in control, and to trust that God knows what is best for us. It's easy to trust God when things are going according to our own desires. But it takes great faith to trust Him when things are not happening the way we want them to. It takes humility to say, "Not my will, but yours be done." This is a powerful statement of surrender. One that acknowledges that God's wisdom and timing are far superior to. When we let go of our own will, we are also letting go of the fear that comes with uncertainty. We may not understand why certain things happen or why we are being led down a particular path, but by surrendering our will, we are choosing to trust God even when the road ahead is unclear. We are saying, "I don't need to know all the answers because I know the one who holds the answers." This kind of faith is not blind. It is a confident trust in the character of God. He is good, He is faithful, and He will never lead us astray. Letting go of our will also means letting go of the need for instant gratification. In a world where everything is immediate, it can be difficult to wait for God's timing. We want things to happen now, we want to see results immediately, and we want to be in control of the pace of our lives. But God's timing is perfect. He knows the right moment for everything. When we let go of our own will, we surrender our need for immediate answers and trust that God's timing is always best. It's important to understand that letting go of your own will does not mean that you are passive or inactive. Surrendering your will to God does not mean sitting idly by while waiting for things to happen. Instead, it means actively pursuing God's purpose for your life, walking in obedience and being sensitive to His voice. It means that you are willing to follow His lead, even when it takes you out of your comfort zone or leads you in a direction you didn't anticipate. Surrender is not about doing nothing. It is about aligning your actions with God's direction, trusting that He will guide you every step of the way. Ultimately, letting go of your own will is about gaining freedom. The irony is that when we surrender our own desires to God, we find true freedom. Freedom from fear, freedom from control, and freedom from the pressure to create our own destiny. God's plan for our lives is not a burden. It is a plan that brings peace, joy, and fulfillment. When we let go of our own will, we are no longer bound by the limitations of our own understanding. We are free to follow God's perfect plan, knowing that He will provide everything we need along the way. Obedience is the gateway to receiving all that God has prepared for us. It is not simply about following rules or meeting expectations. It is about aligning our hearts and actions with the divine will of God. When we obey God, we open ourselves up to His blessings, His purpose, and His perfect plan for our lives. Obedience is the key that unlocks the door to a life of fulfillment, abundance, and peace. It is through obedience that we access the full measure of what God has in store for us. The challenge we face, however, is that obedience often requires us to surrender our own understanding and desires. We are often tempted to rely on our own wisdom, to take matters into our own hands, and to decide what is best for ourselves. But true obedience involves trust. It is a decision to follow God's guidance, even when it doesn't make sense, even when it goes against our own desires or understanding. It requires faith that God knows what is best for us, even when the path He asks us to take seems uncertain or difficult. Obedience also requires humility. We must acknowledge that God's ways are higher than our ways and His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. His plan for us is far greater than anything we could imagine on our own. When we obey God, we are submitting ourselves to His authority and recognizing that His wisdom far exceeds ours. In the act of obedience, we relinquish our own pride and surrender our desires to His perfect will. There is also a profound connection between obedience and our ability to receive. God has already made available to us everything we need for life and godliness, but it is through obedience that we access these provisions. When we obey God, we demonstrate our willingness to trust Him, and it is through this trust that we receive the fullness of His promises. God is a good Father who desires to bless His children, but His blessings are often conditional on our willingness to obey. The more obedient we are, the more we open ourselves to receive what He has prepared for us. Obedience is not about legalism or simply following a set of rules. It is about relationship. When we obey God, we are expressing our love for Him. Jesus Himself said, "If you love me, keep my commandments." Obedience flows out of a heart of love and devotion. It is a natural response to the grace and goodness of God. We obey not because we have to, but because we want to honor God and live according to His will. It is through obedience that we cultivate a deeper relationship with Him and experience the fullness of His presence in our lives. Obedience also brings peace. When we follow God's instructions, we experience a sense of peace that surpasses all understanding. We no longer have to carry the burden of trying to figure things out on our own or worry about what will happen next. When we obey, we trust that God is leading us, that He is guiding our steps, and that His plan is unfolding. This peace is not based on our circumstances, but on our trust in God's faithfulness and His ability to lead us through every situation. At times, obedience may require sacrifice. We may be called to lay down our own desires, to give up things that we think are important, or to step out of our comfort zone. But the rewards of obedience far outweigh the sacrifices. God's blessings are always greater than what we give up. When we obey, we position ourselves to receive the fullness of what He has for us. We may not always understand the process, but we can trust that God's plan is always for our good. Obedience is not a one-time act, but a lifestyle. It is a daily choice to follow God, to listen to His voice, and to walk in His ways. As we continue to obey, we grow in our relationship with Him, and our ability to receive from Him increases. The more we obey, the more we align ourselves with His purpose, and the more we experience the abundant life He has promised. Obedience is the key that opens the door to a life filled with purpose, peace, and the blessings of God. When we obey, we position ourselves to receive all that He has for us. To walk by faith is to live with a profound trust in God's promises, even when the circumstances don't align with what we hope for or expect. Walking by faith is not about relying on what we can see or understand with our natural minds. It is about stepping out into the unknown, trusting that God will lead us every step of the way. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. It is in this place of trust that we experience the power and the presence of God in our lives. Walking by faith is a choice, a decision to trust God with our lives, to believe in His promises, even when we cannot see how they will come to pass. Faith is not blind. It is rooted in the knowledge of who God is. It is not a leap into uncertainty, but a step into the assurance that God is faithful and that His word is true. Walking by faith means relying on God's character, His ability to fulfill what He has spoken, and His commitment to His children. Faith is a response to what God has already revealed about Himself. It is trusting in the one who is all-knowing, all-powerful, and ever-present. When we choose to walk by faith, we are choosing to trust that God's plan for our lives is greater than anything we could ever design for ourselves. Walking by faith often means stepping outside of our comfort zones. It requires us to surrender our desire for control and to trust that God is leading us into places where we cannot see the entire picture. We may not always understand the journey, but when we walk by faith, we trust that God is directing our steps. Faith calls us to go forward without seeing the end result, to obey God even when we don't have all the answers. In the natural, this can seem risky, but in the spirit, it is the only path that leads to the fulfillment of God's purpose for our lives. One of the greatest challenges in walking by faith is overcoming fear. Fear is a natural response when we face the unknown, but faith is the antidote to fear. Faith is the assurance that God is with us, that He has already gone before us, and that He will never leave us. When we walk by faith, we make the conscious decision to trust God's perfect love, which casts out all fear. Walking by faith means choosing to believe that no matter what we face, God is in control, and He is working everything together for our good. Another aspect of walking by faith is learning to wait on God's timing. Our natural inclination is to rush ahead, to make things happen, and to control the pace of our lives. But walking by faith requires patience. It means trusting that God's timing is perfect, even when it feels like nothing is happening. It's easy to become impatient when things don't move as quickly as we want. But faith teaches us to wait with expectation, knowing that God's delays are not denials. When we walk by faith, we trust that God is preparing us for what lies ahead and that His timing is always right. Walking by faith also involves obedience. When God calls us to take a step, faith means responding in obedience, even when we don't fully understand why or how. God may lead us down a path that doesn't make sense to our logical minds, but obedience to His voice is a sign of trust. Faith and obedience go hand in hand. Obedience is the natural outflow of faith. When we walk by faith, we trust that God knows what He is doing, and we follow His lead without hesitation. Finally, walking by faith is not a solitary journey. It requires the support of a community of believers, people who can encourage and uplift us when our faith wavers. We were never meant to walk alone. The body of Christ exists to help one another, to pray for each other, and to strengthen one another on the journey. Walking by faith means being willing to lean on others and allow others to lean on us as we all pursue the calling of God on our lives. But walking by faith is the only way to experience the fullness of God's purpose. It is the key that unlocks the doors to the promises of God. As we step out in faith, we align ourselves with His will and allow His power to work in and through us. Faith opens the door to the supernatural, to miracles, and to the provision of God. It is through faith that we move from limitation to possibility, from doubt to assurance, and from fear to freedom. Walking by faith is not just a principle, it is a lifestyle. It is a way of life that leads us into the fulfillment of God's purpose for us. Receiving the abundance that God has for you is not about merely asking for blessings. It is about positioning yourself to receive the fullness of what God has already prepared for you. God has already made provisions for every area of your life, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and physically. He desires for you to live in abundance, to experience His grace in every aspect of your being. But in order to truly receive this abundance, you must understand that it is not something you have to strive for or earn. It is a gift from God that comes through faith, obedience, and alignment with His will. The first key to receiving the abundance God has for you is the recognition that abundance is not limited to material things. While God does desire to bless his people with provision and prosperity, true abundance is much deeper. It is about the overflow of peace, joy, love, and purpose that comes from being aligned with God's plan for your life. The abundance of God is not just about having more, but about living a life full of his presence, his peace, and his purpose. When you seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, everything else will be added to you. Abundance begins in the heart, and it flows out into every area of your life. One of the barriers to receiving the abundance God has for you is the mindset of lack. When you believe that there is not enough or that you are not deserving of God's blessings, you limit what he can do in your life. A mindset of lack keeps you focused on what you don't have rather than on what God has already provided. But God's economy operates differently. He is a God of more than enough, and his supply is unlimited. When you understand that God's resources are inexhaustible, you can begin to receive in abundance. Faith in God's provision allows you to open your heart to the fullness of what he wants to give you. Another crucial element in receiving God's abundance is the willingness to surrender your own plans and desires. God's abundance is often tied to his purpose for your life. He desires to bless you, not for your own benefit alone, but so that you can be a vessel of blessing to others. When you align your desires with God's will, you position yourself to receive the abundance he has for you. Sometimes the things we desire may not be in line with his purpose, and in those moments, surrendering your will becomes key. As you trust in God's plan for your life, you open the door for his abundance to flow freely into your life, not just for you, but through you to others. Obedience is another important aspect of receiving the abundance God has for you. God's abundance is often tied to his instructions. When you walk in obedience, you are demonstrating your trust in God's provision and timing. God's blessings flow through obedience. And as you follow his leading, he will open doors for you that no one can shut. Obedience is not about following a set of rules. It is about responding to God's voice and stepping out in faith. When you obey God's instructions, you position yourself to receive everything he has in store for you. Moreover, receiving God's abundance requires a heart of gratitude. The more grateful you are for what God has already done, the more you open yourself up to receive even more. Gratitude unlocks the door to greater blessings. When you take time to thank God for what he has already provided, you express your faith in his goodness, and that gratitude creates an environment where his blessings can multiply. God delights in those who are grateful, for gratitude reflects a heart that trusts in his provision and is ready to receive more. Receiving the abundance that God has for you also requires patience. God's timing is perfect, and while we may want things to happen quickly, his ways are higher than our ways. Abundance often comes in seasons, and it is in those seasons of waiting that God refines our character and prepares us to handle the blessings he has in store. Patience is not about passivity. It is about trusting God's timing and being ready to receive when the time is right. When you wait on God, you grow in faith, and you learn to trust that his timing is always for your good. Finally, it is essential to remember that receiving God's abundance is not about selfishness or greed. God blesses us so that we can be a blessing to others. The abundance he provides is not meant to be hoarded, but shared. When you are willing to give, to sow into the lives of others, you position yourself to receive even more from God. The more you pour out, the more God fills you up. His abundance flows through you to meet the needs of others. And in doing so, he continues to bless you in greater measure. Receiving the abundance God has for you is not about striving or working harder. It is about trusting, surrendering, and aligning yourself with His will. As you walk in faith, obedience, and gratitude, you open the door to receive the fullness of His blessings, spiritually, emotionally, and materially. The abundance God has for you is beyond what you could ever imagine. It is His desire to pour it into your life, but you must be ready to receive it. When you trust in His provision, surrender your will, and remain obedient to His voice, you position yourself to experience the overflowing abundance He has prepared for you.